You just got into watches and you purchased a few budget pieces, we're talking a couple $100 or so, but your itch only got worse. You've been reading way too many watch articles and scrolling through an endless amount of Instagram watch feeds showing off luxury watches, and now you want one too. There's all sorts of options for you, but let's just stick with modern for now, and let's just say your budget is between $4,000 and $7,000, which I know is a large sum of dough, but it's what you'll need to spend to get your foot in the door of some of these big luxury watch brands. Since it's your first quote-unquote big watch purchase, you'll want something that's first off available, I'm looking at you, one that's durable, versatile, has a good story, and actually looks good on your wrist. I covered a great option in my last video with the Omega Aquaterra, but this time we'll be looking at something else from IWC's recently updated Mark series of pilot's watches. This one is the Mark 20, and I wore it for a week and brought it close to its natural habitat outside of an airport to see if it's a watch you should be considering. The IWC Mark series first came on the scene after World War II as the Mark 11 and was issued to the British Ministry of Defence as a pilot's watch. It's seen a few iterations since then, but the most recent version was released back in 2022 as the Mark 20, which replaced the Mark 18. Yes, they skipped 19, or at least to me they did. IWC says this Laureus Sport for Good limited edition was technically the Mark 19, but it wasn't given the Mark 19 name, so was it really the 19? Nonetheless, the Mark series definitely has roots in aviation, but I don't find them quite as piloty as, say, IWC's very own 46mm Big Pilot, or even the Big Pilot 43. The Mark series was always considerably smaller, coming in at 36mm originally with the Mark 11 and 40mm on this new Mark 20, and this made it a much easier watch to wear on a day-to-day basis. No aviation needed, just a good all-around watch that can fit into a variety of situations life throws your way. A perfect one-watch collection type of watch. The discontinued Mark 18 was a very popular watch, but it was also one of those watches where we all sorta loved it, but it just had a few things that were a tiny bit off that stopped people like me from really considering it. It was only 40mm, but felt a tad too large for me because of the rather broad 51mm lug-to-lug length. It also came equipped with a modified Salida movement, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but the people seem to be demanding in-house movements at this price point, or at least in-group movements from the major watch brands nowadays. More on that later. There were also things like a low water resistance rating and dial proportions that really irked some people, but those weren't a big deal to me. However, with the launch of the Mark 20, almost all of those issues were addressed or fixed. The newest iteration comes in at the same 40mm diameter, but the lug-to-lug distance of 49mm and shorter lugs really does wonders for how it contours to the wrist, or at least my 7.25-inch wrist. It definitely feels smaller than the Mark 18, which is a good thing depending on your wrist size and your preference. The Salida movement was also replaced with IWC's or Richemont's or Val Fleurier's caliber 32111. Confused? Well, Richemont owns a lot of brands with IWC being one, and movement manufacturer Val Fleurier being the other, and Val Fleurier made the movement for IWC, so I guess it's in-house. I'll let you decide that, but whatever the case may be, it has an impressive 5 days worth of power in a case that's only 10.8mm thick. I don't know of many watches in this price range that hit that mark besides Oris's caliber 400 movement series. I always appreciate a long power reserve, even though I probably don't need it. Just wear your watch. It also now has 100 meters of water resistance compared to 60 with the Mark 18, as well as a dial that subtly nudges a few things around to give it a slightly more proportioned look than its predecessor. All of these, what would seem to be minuscule changes, minus the movement, that's a pretty big change, really add up to help make the Mark 20 the watch we all wanted instead of the Mark 18, right? It's at least what I think the people wanted, but is it enough? Look, iterative changes definitely work for brands like Rolex because no matter what, people are going to eat those things up. But I personally find a lot of Rolex's newer models a bit too clinical for my taste. I prefer their older 5-digit references, but their sales numbers would definitely disagree with me. The Mark 20's iterative improvements from the Mark 18 were much needed, but for some people, like my colleague Tony Trena, he thinks maybe they should have looked for a wee bit more inspiration from some of their older references, specifically the Mark 11 or 12, which he owns the latter and unabashedly loves to death. He's a vintage guy. I actually agree with him to a certain extent, and I'm really envious of his personal Mark 12, but that's where I think IWC's Spitfire fits in. Just shrink it a millimeter or two and you'd be pretty damn close to a Mark 12 lover's dream. The IWC Mark 20, in my opinion, is a phenomenal option for anyone looking to get their very first luxury watch, or for someone that needs a quintessential go anywhere, do anything companion strapped to your wrist. Yes, it's labeled a pilot's watch, but like I said before, we'll let some of IWC's larger offerings handle the real aviation. On land, the Mark 20 will fit into almost any situation you throw its way. The Mark 18 was close, but the Mark 20 is better in every single aspect. As my other colleague, Danny Milton, said in his introduction to this watch a few months back, it's the IWC Mark watch we've all been wanting for more than half a decade now, and it seems the brand has delivered. So yeah, I couldn't recommend this watch more.